Hello everybody. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about global projects and the common features within them, and more specifically about the video game industry and the recent game Animal Crossing's New Horizons. Um, there are many things that global projects share, even though they're very different. So you might have a variety of industries ranging from finance, technology, mineral exploitation, medicine. You can have all types of companies that are global in scope and yet have very different corporate cultures, approaches to doing business, industries, and leadership styles and strategic initiatives. However, all of them do share many common features, and these features are often related not just to the opportunities that they share by being global companies, but the risks that they all have to endure because they're global companies. And these can be types of risks like political risks. So you can understand that there are a lot of different political and legal environments that exist within very different countries, and global companies have to navigate all of them independently within all the different environments. And this creates a huge effort, this creates a huge need of effort to understand the environment, the politics, the regulations, where the laws are going for every single country where these companies operate. And the laws can be very different everywhere. So the laws in Europe are going to be very different from the laws in Africa. And global companies have to abide by all of them, and they have to understand the way that they're mutating, the way that they're changing, because otherwise the risk might become too great. Another big risk is currency fluctuation, because the world doesn't have a unique currency. So wherever global companies operate and they have operations or they have sales, they will have to adapt to the way that currency fluctuates, with mostly a dollar, but with whatever other currencies that they use. And this means that these companies have to be constantly aware, and they might have to use options and futures and different ways to offset this type of risk. Because as global companies, they cannot always predict what is going to happen, but they will always have to be very invested in the outcome of what is happening. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Animal Crossing New Horizons, because I think it's a great example of how a global project works. And of course, when you have a company like Nintendo that has been making global video games for years, you would think that these companies are already very familiar with the trappings of what a global company is and how a global company operates. And it's very important to understand that just because Nintendo is a Japanese company does not mean that all of their games are made in Japan. They do have different variations of the game that exist everywhere. So you might have different types of graphics that exist within the Japanese version, and you might have different languages that have different types of concentrations of words and images that vary according to the culture and the playing style of each different culture. Because when it comes to video games, just like in any other market, there is no homogeneity when it comes to the world. And this means that while this can be a very huge simulation game that is very important for Nintendo, it is obviously going to be very complex to sell everywhere across the world. Especially when you realize that there are very big cultural differences with the way that with the way that people not just approach video games, but how they buy them. For example, here in Latin America, video game companies have to be very aware of the high price sensitivity of customers. Whereas in Europe, customers are not that invested in the prices of the video games as much as the quality of the gameplay and of the story. Whereas you might have some other types of consumers in China that are mostly interested in the multiplayer mechanics of it. And this means that while this video game was designed by a Japanese company, it also has had to have input from people from all over the world, and every version that is released has to be very aware not just of the playing characteristics of each country, but of the regulations, because you might have countries that restrict certain types of content when it comes to children, or you might have countries that have a very strict and lengthy process for approval of a game, for example, like the United Kingdom might have. And all of this means that not just Nintendo, but every single company that operates globally will have at some point to deal with risks that are related to currency, political, legal, and consumer needs. And they have to be very aware of these risks, because being aware of these risks is not only it's not only a life-saving thing, but it also creates a lot of opportunities, because big global companies have more opportunities than domestic companies. They can diversify their earnings. They can grow at very rapid paces because they are invested in the companies that are growing the fastest. And they are not bound to a single country's economic downturn or to a single country's regulation. And they are able to thrive because they not only understand the way to deal with these risks, but because they understand how all of this can become an opportunity. And Nintendo is one of these companies. They started originally with playing cards in Japan at the end of the 19th century, and now they're one of the biggest companies in the world when it comes to technology and video games by sales. And this is because they really understand that consumers are very different everywhere. And they have had trouble in the past reaching audiences, for example, like the Americans, or reaching audiences with different types of needs. For example, the PC audience has always been very reluctant of Nintendo because Nintendo was the maker of some of the biggest game consoles in history. And yet, they've managed to be successful because they understand not only the risks that exist within the global environment, but the opportunities that they can also profit from. And it is also worth noting that Animal Crossing has been one of the most successful games that they have released recently. And it is very critically acclaimed, and it has had huge success in a lot of different cultures and countries. And this is no accident. This is because Nintendo very clearly understands what they're doing and very clearly has a global talent pool that they recruit from and a global diversity of ideas that they have to be very aware of, and that they have to be very clear in understanding, even if they're a Japanese company.